Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Public Safety and Protection Full Committee meeting, 20th of January 2021. Just have a few things to say before we move on to the formal agenda for today's meeting. Firstly, the formal legal standing of the meeting is being held under the Local Authorities Police and Crime Panel's Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authority and Police and Crime Panel Meetings, England and Wales Regulations 2020. To take account of these regulations, Bristol City Council has produced a set of virtual meeting procedure rules, and these are available on our website. This means that the decisions made by the committee will have the same standing and validity as if they'd been held in person at a meeting in City Hall. Can I ask members of the committee to ensure that their sound is muted when they are not speaking, and after you have spoken, please remember to mute your sound again. And if you have any questions during the meeting, please use the raise hand function so that the chair can see that you wish to speak. And if there are no further questions from councillors, I'll move on to Ruth Pickersgill, who's the chair for this meeting, to move the formal agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. And welcome everybody. In case there are a lot of people watching, I think we'll do some introductions just to make it clear who are the members here today. So Oliver has just introduced himself from Democratic Services. I'm Ruth Pickersgill, I'm councillor for Eastern Ward. I'm going to go round just who is on my screen in that order. So in terms of councillors, Steve, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Councillor Steve Jones from Stockwood Ward.
Thank you. And Chris?
Chris Davis, Councillor for Norwell Ward.
Thank you. And Richard?
I'm Richard Eddy from Bishopsworth.
Thank you. And in terms of officers who are present, Emma, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Emma Lake. I'm licensing team leader.
Thank you. And Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. Jonathan Martin, licensing manager with the council. Okay,
thank you. You're very quiet, Jonathan. So if you're speaking more, you might have to have your volume up or something. Lovely. Okay, thank you very much. So do we have any formal apologies, please, Oliver?
Yes, we've received formal apologies from Councillor Stella Tingle.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Okay. Can we look at the minutes of the last meeting? That was back in June, and the minutes have all been circulated. Does anyone have any comment?
No.
No questions? No. Okay. Could I take those as agreed?
Yes, ready.
Okay, so I'll take them as agreed. Thank you. Okay, we'll move to the public forum, but I gather there are no public forum items for today.
Right, Chair, no public forum received.
Thank you. So we'll move straight to the substantive item today, and that's item 6, which is revision to the Hackney carriage and private hire policies. And I think we all know the background to this, that due to the national guidance coming out around minimum standards, we've had to then go through all of our policies and, well, I say we, I haven't had to do it, but officers have had to go through all of the policies and try and look at our policies in relation to the national standards and to make recommendations. And there were also several other policies that we'd already talked about at various times, like the TINTS policy, the DBS policy, and various other policies that private hire operators that needed to be updated. So what Emma and Jonathan have done is a major piece of work to kind of put the whole lot together. So we've got a lot of paperwork here, which hopefully everybody's had a chance to go through. And what I think we'll do is ask Emma to introduce, and then we'll look at the policy generally. Then if there's any particular issues about the TINTS, the private hire, the mandatory cards policies, then we'll pick those up as we go through. So if I can hand over to Emma, or if Jonathan wants to add anything as well, to give us a brief overview, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. So as Councillor Pickersgill's flagged, some of these changes were approved early last year, but because of a number of things, some of them have been changed slightly, and some of them there are new requirements. So we had the certain changes that Ruth had flagged ready to go. We've made the changes, and now what I was going to do is just basically flag the key changes that are kind of at risk for drivers, that are going to could have quite a big impact on drivers, and then quickly talk you through the appendices that go through that are attached to the report, because they're all really interlinked. So basically, in terms of the key changes, as Ruth has flagged, is a new private hire operator policy. So historically, we don't have an operator policy. We have certain things in that are we already do for operators, but it was more about putting it into practice and into writing. So we have a policy which was approved, and then following the statutory standards, we've updated them. So there have been some changes, and that is flagged in one of the appendices that talks about what changes we've made from what's current, what was previously agreed, to what the new policies are. So that's quite a big change for us. And interlinked with that, there's quite a lot of changes to the private hire operator conditions, because it basically, if there's something in the policy, we want to make sure there's a condition where relevant that they will abide by that condition. So that's one of the key changes. In terms of drivers, and a lot of the changes from the statutory standards are to do with drivers. So the DBS update service, we'd already had approval for looking at rolling out that policy change last year. However, interlinked with that, because of the impact it can have on drivers, if approved, in terms of whether licenses can be suspended and things. Another element that's going to be linked to that is the changes to the convictions policy. So I'm sorry if I'm jumping around a bit, but I just want to kind of explain how the impact could be on the drivers. So what we've done already is we've rolled out online DBS checks to help with drivers. We've already got a number of drivers that are doing online DBS certificates, so that they can already sign up to the update service, and we can currently now actually run checks on those drivers that signed up to the update service. So following this policy change, once everyone's on the online system, we'll be able to look at everybody's DBS status. But aligned to that is the convictions policy. So as we're getting more drivers coming through now with their convictions, and if they have convictions, we have information on our records, we'll be able to look at those convictions and see if there's any impact on the new convictions policy, because some things, which I'll touch on later, currently say, they may not be licensed, or it might be for a certain period of time, 5 years after conviction. Under the new policy, it could be a longer time. So we're going to need to reconsider those drivers to see if they meet our policy in line with the new policies. And that was one of the key themes that ran through the statutory changes, is about, we make all these policy changes, but what impact do they have on existing license holders? And that's why it's taken some time to really kind of look at, as well as having a policy, practically how are these policy changes going to work? Because we want to make it as easy as we can, or as simple as we can, so that we can actually get everyone through the new convictions policy, for example. Another kind of fundamental change for drivers is the introduction of a certificate of good character. Now, this is quite, some councils already do this, and we've been looking at that. So, but in the policy, we've kind of kept it quite brief, because what we're going to do is we're going to have guidance alongside the policy to show drivers what countries they may not be able to get them from. So it's basically, if they're out of the country for a certain period of time, they need to provide a certificate of good character from that country. That's quite a big change. We have no idea how many drivers that's going to affect, and that, it is, the onus will be on the drivers to tell us they're out of the country for that period of time. But again, we want to make sure that the guidance is alongside it, so that if drivers are affected by it, that we actually, there's a practical process. And can I just flag as well that a lot of these changes we've included in the Equalities Impact Assessment. That's one of the appendices to this as well. So that we're really considering the impact on drivers. So I've touched on the convictions policy. In terms of kind of vehicles, the main changes that kind of flag out in terms of more costs or more processes for applicants is for vehicles. So vehicle applicants under the new policy and the statutory standards, they will need to provide a basic disclosure. Again, that's a new process that they didn't need to do before. So that's kind of, I've touched on the operator policy. So that's kind of very kind of high level. They're the key kind of risks that risk areas that are kind of going to cause more work or more issues for drivers. In terms of the consultation, and I can go through the report. It talks about who we're going to consult with internally, externally. Again, the statutory standards talk about who we're going to be consulted with. And so we've amended and extended who we would normally consult with in line with the statutory standards to reflect that. And basically the consultation, as I was talking earlier, we'll be meeting with the consultation team, but it would be really good to get some comments from yourselves about any things that you really would like us to flag. but it's looking like it'll be it'll be an 8-week consultation. There will be an online questionnaire where we'll be talking again to the consultation team to do that. And then basically what we're asking for today is approval for the consultation, and then we can bring back a report to yourselves. So if I can just go through, has anyone got any questions before I run through the appendices?
Just one thing, Emma, could you put your mic away from your mouth a little bit? It's
Okay,
echoing.
yeah. Sorry. Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, is that okay? Is that better?
Yeah, it's getting on my nerves a little bit.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Okay.
Well, then,
Okay, great. So the appendices. So like I say, there is quite a lot of appendices and they're quite long documents. Appendix 1 is really important because it talks about all of the statutory national standards. And if I can just briefly touch on the standards. So they're published by the Department for Transport, and basically we need to follow those standards, or if we don't, we need to have a very good reason why we're not going to follow those standards. So Appendix 1 is the summary of those standards, and it talks about what the current position is in terms of the policy, or it might be a process, and then what the next step. So what do we need to do for it? So although today we're asking for approval for the consultation, approval for the policy to go for consultation, what's really important is this actually is going to kind of be publishing where we are with all of the statutory standards, even if there isn't a policy change needed. Because again, one of the statutory standards is about us being clear and transparent in terms of our alignment to the statutory standards. So although some of them might not talk about actually being in the policy, actually it's really important that we are following and abiding by the statutory standards. In terms of Appendix 2, so that is like I touched on earlier, so that's about the current policy and the proposed policies, and then we've tried to link it back to try and make it easier to navigate in terms of the number that's in the previous documents of where does it relate. Appendix 3 is all of our policies and all of our conditions. So currently they're all published separately on the website. So obviously now it's a very long document, but one of the actual statutory standards was to bring everything together into one policy document. So that's what we've done. And Appendix 4 is the Equalities Impact Assessment. Is there anything anyone wants me to go over at the moment before I move on to tints briefly? Sorry, I can't see everybody because I've only got one screen, so I've kind of made everything.
I'm looking at the participants list. Nobody's got their hand up at the moment. Okay,
great, brilliant. Okay, so if I just talk about kind of the previous changes, so because I know we've talked about tints. So basically, the trade have asked for us to review this aspect of the policy, so that vehicles, because a lot of vehicles when they're manufactured now come with tints. So currently drivers are having to pay to have tints removed to comply with the policy. So the policy is drafted in a way that actually if it comes with tints, that they can keep those tints to obviously keep the costs down for drivers. Has anyone got any questions about tints? No? Okay. Yeah. Like I said, the other changes before were the DBS update service, which I think I've spoken to you about quite a few times now about the update service, but and then obviously the operator policy, which we have tweaked slightly after speaking to legal services in terms of we've taken out some aspects of it, but only in terms of what documents do operators need to submit when they submit their applications, because we can just put that on the website. It doesn't need to be in the policy, but that was kind of the key changes. I feel like that's it in a summary. John, have I missed anything?
That is it in a nutshell. We can expand upon the national standards if any members wish to discuss those in more detail. The other small one that you have missed, Emma, is reference to card readers within vehicles as becoming a mandatory requirement for Hackney carriages. That was a request from the trade. So again, this is to improve consumers' ability to pay by card as opposed to just cash. A request from the trade. There is a small burden there for for trade, because obviously they've got to fund the fitting of card readers into their vehicles. But it's pretty modest. You can fit card readers into vehicles now for mobile card readers for £6-7 a month. So a pretty modest investment, and hopefully that will improve consumer access to vehicles. If very frequently, how many of us actually travel with cash now? And of course, with the general shift towards app-based booking systems, it kind of makes sense that we make that a requirement for the Hackney Carriage trade to improve access.
Thanks, John. And it's worth flagging, they can do that now anyway. So a lot of the trade have done that already, but this is to make it mandatory.
Okay, we've got a question from Councillor Eddy.
To be fair, it's not really a question, Chairman. I'm conscious the committee or the representation's quite small today, but most of us have served on the tax working group, and I think we've spoken to Jonathan and Emma before, so I'm not surprised there haven't been various queries. Frankly, as you've said before, Chairman, the donkey work's been done by the officers, so my thanks to them. They've done a great job, of course. I'm aware before we started formally, I overheard a conversation between Emma and the chairman, and where Emma said she wanted to have feedback from the consultation group team before making recommendations. This seems sensible to me. I'm also aware you, Chairman, you've been very closely involved with this. So I would be happy proposing we delegate you with the power to speak to Emma and the consultation team and highlight any element of the consultation we need to do. Would you be happy with that?
I'd be very happy to do that, yes. I mean, I think I've said before, my concern is how on earth we make this consultation process accessible to people, particularly who don't have English as a first language, because as we know, if we don't make it accessible and the policies change, we'll end up with a lot of people coming to PSP who haven't understood that they were supposed to do certain things, because the policies change. So I think it's in everyone's interest that we make it really accessible to everybody. So yes, I'm very happy to do that. Thank you, Richard. Can I raise, right, Councillor Davis, and then...
Just, if I can go back to Emma, you mentioned earlier on we have people from abroad that want to say continue taxi driving, and you mentioned something about their previous convictions. Now, I presume that's on the honesty of the convicted, but there's no actual investigation further than that, is there? Maybe you could just comment on that.
Yes, no problem. So it's just in terms of, so say if a driver had a conviction for something, and in our current policy, they'd have to be free for conviction from that type of conviction for 5 years. For example, the national standard might be saying 10 years. So we would need to reconsider that driver under the current policy.
Right. Okay.
And because
so we had drivers abroad, and we found out afterwards that their convictions, and it's only on them admitting it that we found that out. Okay.
So it should be on their DBS normally. If
they voluntarily put that down, that they've had a conviction. Hide it. Yeah.
The DBS would always have it. You can't hide it from a DBS. So no. That's not them voluntarily putting it down. That's that would be factual. John, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's a good point, Councillor. And we're always at the mercy of applications when they're coming through of honesty in their declarations. And of course, very frequently, through the checks and balances that we have with applicants, particularly if they're an existing driver, where they may have picked up points on their driving license for speeding offences, etc., and then those checks upon renewal come through, where we then establish that they are that they've had these convictions for speeding, etc. And what this policy does is make sure that those convictions can be taken at point of renewal as if those are new convictions, if that makes sense. Now, the issue with DBS is it's only ever a point in time check, and the significant enhancement of the electronic DBS is through the processes that you're able to run, because it's you increase the frequency of when you're looking for what's called a change of status. So when we do the periodic check, say every 6 months, I think we're proposing, isn't it, Emma? 6 monthly check on DBS, where currently it's 3 yearly check. That's significantly increased the frequency at which their DBS is being verified. So we then investigate the change of status to establish what's given rise to that change of status.
Right.
The other change, which I think should provide you with some reassurance, we absolutely recognise that the trade is made up predominantly of BAME from the BAME community. Now, the certificates of good character, whilst is an improvement in terms of confidence of fit and proper person status, it is flawed. There are some flaws with it, because if we have drivers coming in from, say, war-torn areas, obtaining a certificate of good character is going to be incredibly difficult, if not impossible. But that doesn't mean to say they're not fit and proper. They may not be able to obtain a certificate of good character, and that's why we're trying to build it into the policy with the guidance sitting alongside it, that there does need to be some degree of flexibility with the application of the policy when applying the fitness test to a driver's application. It's going to be very, very difficult in those circumstances where these certificates aren't available. And there's a number of countries that we're aware of where such certificates, either they're not available, or they're just going to be very, very, or of no quality whatsoever to establishing the previous conduct of that person.
Okay.
I think I'm interested in what will end up coming back to committee. So I think we need to be clear about what we're delegating to officers. So in those situations, I wouldn't expect anybody who can't get certificates of good character to be having to come to committee or anything like that. But the thing that worries me at the moment, more than anything else, is the retrospective application of this to existing drivers, because I think it's pretty clear if we get a new driver and they've got a conviction, we now know exactly, you know, what will happen when they come to committee, because it's clear how many years they'll be suspended for or revoked or whatever. What I'm not really sure is, and it'd be helpful to know what you're thinking, is that if we've already seen somebody at committee, we've given them back their license after 3 years, because that's what the policy said. If the new policy is saying for that particular conviction that they had, it should really have been 5 years. If they're then coming back to renew, are we going to pick that up and say, well, actually, now for that thing you did 3 years ago, it should have been 5 years. So you've actually got another 2 years. So we need to take you back to committee, because that's going to cause a lot of difficulty and you know, probably quite a lot of backlog for the committee. So I'm just wondering if there's any clarification about the retrospective application of the more severe conviction rates.
Okay, if I can just step in, John, if that's all right. So what we were thinking is, because this is why we're trying to align the online DBS, because basically once, if approved, it would mean that everybody would have to be signed up to the update service within 6 months. So in theory, we'd have 6 months to go through everybody's license again to consider them. Now, I have tried to get some data from other authorities to work out, you know, is that going to be possible? You know, I don't know. We don't have any data. We don't keep, you know, we can't from our database work out how many drivers might have convictions that might be affected by this. There is no data. So I don't know how much work is going to be involved, but we kind of thought, actually, if we've got to get everyone signed up to the update service, at that point in time, we'll know their convictions if they have any. And as we're running the checks, so we'll be checking for new convictions, but that was kind of the main thing, to try and align them rather than get everyone signed up to the update service and then re-look at all the DBS certificates, because actually as soon as we get the new DBS certificate, that is what we need to consider.
Okay. And are we going to be looking for certificates of, what's it called, good character retrospectively as well? So if we discover again that we've been renewing somebody quite happily year on year, but actually they spent 6 months in Somalia 2 years ago, are we going to retrospectively expect them to go back and look for something, or is it only in the current year that we're looking at?
To be honest, we don't normally ask that on the application in terms of retrospectively. So I don't think we would know unless it was thrown up, but we can take it away and have a look at that and amend the policy if you want us to. That's fine before we go to consultation. But I think if it's flagged, we could ask them for it, because actually we might want to find out what, if anything, happened. But then we might not. So again, I could consult with John or yourself, Councillor Pickersgill, as the chair. There's a number of things we can do for that.
Okay.
Emma, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the standard is silent on the application.
Sorry, I can't hear you, John.
Sorry, Chair. Emma, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the standards are silent on the application retrospectively of certificates of good character.
Well, to be honest, the standard's it just says we need to consider all our policy changes in terms of existing license holders. So it doesn't stipulate each aspect of the policy retrospectively. So, which is quite, to be honest, because that's quite a piece of work to look at existing license holders. But I think, we could have in the policy. So, for example, for the English assessment for existing drivers, we've kind of put that in there that if members wanted to, you could ask drivers. So we could say if members or the licensing team leader or manager wanted a driver to do that because they had a valid reason. But I think we could do that anyhow, because if we want to be sure that someone's fit and proper, we could ask for that.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, actually, because I think that is a major issue, because if we're being quite rigorous with new drivers about they have to have, it was entry level 3, wasn't it? English, written and oral, then we know that a number of the drivers who come to committee don't have that. So would we then only be picking up the ones who come to committee and say, well, actually, we think they need to do that as well? Or who would be sort of making those decisions along the way? Because you might just, I want it to be a really clear process that's not discriminatory. So it's not just you happen to notice somebody that isn't talking very good English, so you refer them, retrospectively. That can't be the process. So I don't really know how we can, we're all right with people who've gone through the gold standard, but we're talking, because they will have had to have done a test. So we're talking about people prior to the gold standard. What criteria would we have to revisit their English? Would it only be if something's come up that flags it up, or it's come to committee, or would we be in any way trying to get them to actually do some sort of test at some point or other?
So in the draft policy, I don't know if you want me to share it with you, or I can just read it out. But so we've got the requirement for new drivers, but in terms of language proficiency, it says the council will have the right to require applicants and licence holders to complete a mandatory test of their language proficiency, which will cover both oral and written English language skills and to be specified by the council. Such a test will be completed at the licensee's expense. So that's kind of quite open-ended, because actually as part of the fit and proper person test, we can ask people, our policy can require a number of things. So that one does leave it quite open-ended, because I think the more you specify, it might not cover all eventualities. But that basically says, a bit like you have in some drivers for the gold standard. Actually, I don't think the policy says at any point you can require drivers to do the gold standard, but actually you can do that. That's within your gift as members of the committee.
So it might be one of the criteria we use when we're making a decision at committee. We might add that onto the list of you have to do A, B, C, D. Yeah.
I think that's probably where it's most likely going to be used, to be honest, if it is used. But in terms of the so in terms of the certificate of good character, do you want me to add to the draft a similar kind of wording to the English assessment, saying that the council have the right to, so that you can require that for existing drivers? Because we haven't, I don't think we've just kind of said, let me just find that, sorry, again. Yeah, we've just talked about applicants as opposed to existing, but we can add that in, no problem.
I think it would be useful. I don't know whether I think other members are nodding, but I think it would be useful, because if we've got suspicions and worries about convictions in this country, and we know that they've spent a lot of time in another country as well, I think it would be part of our fit and proper, due diligence, really, to try and look for that as well.
That's fine. I can draft that and add that into it. No problem.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. All right. Does anyone else have any questions or comments or queries?
Ruth, I was just going to follow up the question from Councillor Eddy regarding consultation, just to reassure members. Through the Taxi Forum, we are committing to host a dedicated forum for the taxi trade to run through all of the changes. So we are trying to give them a much more detailed presentation of what it means practically for those who are currently licensed, and encourage responses back to the consultation.
Would that be an open meeting, John, or just the Taxi Forum meeting?
I'm open if members, we're well used to using this format now for communicating with the trade. We can open it up much wider than the forum, so it can be to all drivers if necessary.
Okay.
The challenges is always, just actually controlling the meetings. It can be quite difficult when you've got lots of attendees on Zoom, but I'm pretty used to it now through COVID, of handling large numbers.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Davis, you're mute at the moment.
Just returning to what you were saying earlier on about the BAME drivers we have and people coming into this country. What I wanted to know, I know a lot of them go through this golden test with language, etc. But I know I've been on license for so many years now, on PSP for so many years now, and increasingly we're having interpreters come in to, obviously, to do interpret on behalf of their the taxi driver. And I know there's a cost, and it just seems like the council's bearing the cost. I'm not sure what it is now. It's about £400 a time, and all these people are supposed to be able to speak English, make themselves understood, especially taxi drivers. And I see them coming into committee meetings, and they've got an interpreter there, and it's costing the city council a lot of money. I don't know what the cost is involved. Maybe someone here like Jonathan can tell us.
To be honest, Councillor Davis, I don't know what the total cost is over the course of the year. Obviously, it's at our expense, and because it's a semi-judicial process, we need to ensure that justice is upheld. And if applicants or existing drivers want to avail themselves of an interpreter, we will facilitate that. And in some ways, it may be more expedient to do that, because if we go into an appeal situation following a committee decision taking it through to magistrates, that's going to only ever increase the cost to the authority. So I would hope that balance of justice being seen to be done, and making sure that because we are in a quasi judicial scenario with committee structures, is that sense of natural justice is upheld. But I take your point around the cost. That's just built into the cost for the licensing service, because license fees is what we call a wash its own face service, so it doesn't draw down on central funds. The cost of running a licensing service is borne entirely through licensing fees across the varying functions that we administer.
Jonathan, I've got no problem with having an interpreter there. It's just the cost of it, and it's the ratepayer of this city that's got to pay for it. That's just something else. I just want to make that point.
Yeah, can I just bring in Councillor Eddy and then we'll carry on with that?
I just wanted to support Chris's point, but can I make the point, Jonathan? I'm not saying that this shouldn't be available. I believe I spoke to Chris and he and Peter Abraham went to a licensing conference a few years ago, and I think most of the chairman colleagues who spoke to were from Labour authorities, and they were shocked not by offering the service, but they said in our councils, if people opt for this, they have to pay for it themselves. So I'm just making the point, why are we actually putting the pressure on the council taxpayer?
Well, as I think I explained, in terms of the cost of the licensing service, it doesn't cost the Bristol ratepayer anything. It's a wash its own face service. So the entire cost of running licensing, including Emma's costs, proportions of my time, all the costs within committee, that is actually borne by the licensees themselves, not by the ratepayers. So it's an important distinction there in the understanding.
That, Jonathan, but there's no difference to those northern councils Chris spoke to, and they actually fund it separately.
Okay. Can I suggest as a way forward, because this is slightly outside the remit of this policy, really, that we ask officers to just look at the other core cities and see whether there are, what the pattern is and whether all of them pay, and if we're a complete outsider or not on this. I mean, I think we're all agreed that people do have a right to an interpreter, and I always think about me in France because I think my French is probably good enough to drive a taxi in France and to take the fares and things. But if I went to any sort of committee with formal language and everything else, I would want an interpreter. And I do feel it's in terms of justice, it is a right. And you do notice quite often in committee, people are able to interact with us quite well, and they only need the interpreter for very small parts of the process. But I think it's important. But I think we need to, look at the other authorities and just see who is making them pay and who isn't, and whether that would be held against us in a
problem with the interpreter is the cost.
Yeah.
If they want to pay for it, that's fine.
Yeah. No, that's what we'll ask the other authorities and see what they do.
Happy to take that away, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Okay, any other questions or queries?
Chair, did you want me just to go over what we were asking for today? Because I know you questioned earlier about exactly what we were asking for today.
Well, we can go back to the front of the report in a okay.
No, that's fine.
Go back to the front of the report in a sec. I did just want to make a slight point about the equalities impact assessment, because these things quite often come back to bite us, and I did wonder whether we've been as rigorous as we should be around the ESOL issue. Because under the section about how does it impact on different groups, it's not really very clear that it impacts very significantly in terms of race and religion and those sort of things. And so does the certificate of good quality. So I think we need to be very clear in there that those could indirectly discriminate on grounds of race or religion, and what mitigation we're going to take to, against them discriminating. So the mitigation might be things like, like you were saying, having the list of countries where, there are issues and having an alternative, or, and making sure that courses are available that are accessible to people or online, or, I just think we need to think about what mitigation we can have to make sure we're not discriminating against anyone because of these new requirements. Yeah,
no problem. I'll take that.
Okay. Thank you. So just before we go on, if we go back to what we're being asked to do, then that helps us to focus a bit. So going back to the committee report, which I've now made so small I can't see, we're actually seeking, the recommendation is we're recommended to consider the information in the report, which I think we're busy doing, to delegate authority to the licensing manager to consult on what's in this report, and then to bring a report back to committee to consider the responses to the consultation and any proposed changes. So when is that likely to be? When are we likely to get them back to committee? Because it would be good to be able to wrap this up, because I think from the trades point of view, obviously it has gone on an awful long time, which is due to COVID and everything else.
So having spoken to the consultation team, they think, because they're going to be quite involved in this, they've said that it's likely, or provisionally, it would go live the 2nd to 3rd week in February. So for an 8-week consultation, that would be towards the end of March, I believe. So I would say by the time, depending on, I'm anticipating quite a lot of responses to this because we've expanded the consultation to include a lot more groups and trade, as well as trade groups in terms of the taxi community. There's other groups that we'll be consulting with. So I would say, John, you think April? I wouldn't want to put a date on it at the moment, but John, are you thinking April? You're on mute, John.
Sorry, Emma. Yes, I'm just looking because I want to try and bring that date of consultation forward, because I'm just conscious we're getting very close to pre-election period if the elections are going forward.
That's what I was worried about, because I'd hate it to get delayed for yet more reasons, really.
Oliver, just while I'm looking, have you got the dates of when pre-election period starts?
You're mute as well, Oliver.
Hello.
Sorry, I've just worked out the 8 weeks would be in April, towards the end of March or April, depending on those figures. Sorry, forgive me.
Yeah, I think pre-election period lands around some point in.
Sorry,
Sam.
Sam.
Cut yourself off just when you said the actual month. You're mute again.
Sorry, as I said, I think it's towards the end of March, but so we may have an issue there that we need to kind of try and solve.
I think we will have, yeah. Okay, well, maybe we can ask officers to look at that. I guess there's no way we can shorten the consultation process. I mean, I just can't bear this going on, for another few months, particularly the issues about the cards, which, as Emma and John know, gets raised every single meeting we've been at, and we've been well, not fobbing them off, but we have been explaining the delays, which aren't anybody's fault, but since last.
Sorry, 22nd of March is the actual day it starts pre-election period. So
right. Well, if there's any chance of us trying to slip a PSP in that week or something, that would be really helpful. Councillor Eddy, did you want to speak on that?
Yes. It's speculation, I know, but I don't think any of us know definitely if the elections will be going ahead at the present date. Personally, I think it's practically zero. I believe the government and the RGO have been talking about June or July. I still think probably the smart money is on even later, up to September. So whilst I think we have to work with what we know now, realistically, I don't think we're going to have a near May election.
Okay.
Certainly, right. Chair, all I can advise is obviously licensing is a pretty consultation heavy service. The advice that we've previously received is that shortening consultations to squeeze in, so to speak, if there is a reasonable expectation for 8-week period, which is the standard period of time for consultations and aligns with other consultations that we run, it would be difficult to reduce that period down, and it is undoubtedly a problem. Because of the timescales that we're working to as officers with COVID and with the pre-election period, which clearly there is some uncertainty there. I think the sense that I'm getting, not just around elections but other events as well, is I think it's going to be unlikely that May will be going forward, just because of the timescales that we're working with the current reductions due to COVID in transmission rates, but crucially the hospital admissions, which are still rising, and then working through the periods of time that the hospitals are getting back into some sense of normality, whatever that looks like in this current climate, that you're going to be looking into April anyway. So the idea of bringing potentially large groupings of people or gatherings of groupings together for election periods, for an election, I think as Councillor Eddy is alluding to here, I think the smart money is that it may be pushed back. So we may be on safe grounds here, but absolutely recognising the difficulties we're in with going forward with a consultation and then moving into the pre-election period. There's little we can do at this point in time until we know more.
Okay, well, I think what we need to note is that as members, we would like this to happen as quickly as it is possible to do.
Oh yeah.
Recognising there have already been delays, you know, and there are exceptional circumstances because it's been delayed so much due to COVID and things. So, you know, if we just note that you know, from our point of view, we want it to happen as quickly as it can.
Well, I think it's also, if I may, Chair, just add in there, if you're in agreement, that it's not just a delay due to COVID, it's actually the scale of the changes needed as a result of the national standards, which is placing all local authorities responsible for taxi licensing in great difficulty, layered on top of COVID as well. So we've got it here. And it's been a mammoth undertaking along with our legal colleagues as well, who have already scrutinised this prior to bringing it before members today.
Okay, thank you very much. And we do appreciate all the hard work that's been done on that. So,
Yeah, well done.
okay, so putting forward the recommendations, are members happy with the recommendations, to agree the recommendations? Yeah, okay. So we agree the recommendations in the paper, which is effectively that we go out for consultation, we delegate that process to officers, and we've already said earlier that I will have conversations about the nature of the consultation and the content of it, and with officers, and then it'll come back to the first possible available committee, that it can then become policy. Okay. Right, thank you. So if there isn't anything else, I'd just like to at this point say we're really, really sad we're losing Emma. And this is probably, well, it will be your last Public Safety Committee. And certainly as chair, my role has been made enormously easier by having somebody like Emma, who is so competent and has been able to always come straight back to me with answers and deal with anything. And it's not always the case in all other departments, I have to say, that we have such an efficient service as members. So we will really miss her. And I think particularly this piece of work, I don't think there's probably anyone else who'd be able to do it so thoroughly as Emma has. So thank you very much for all your work, Emma, over the last, how long have you been here?
17 years next
17
week.
years.
Thank you, Chair.
Incredible. So, you know, you will be very, very much missed by the service. I know John will miss you, and I'm sure we certainly all will. So thank you on behalf of Public Safety. And I'd like that recorded. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Is there anything else, or are we okay to stop now? Okay to stop. Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for your support today, and we look forward to the consultation going live. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, members. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.